universities with like 30,000 students going live on u.com where all the students can use it and the professors, which I think will push those universities and all their professors to realize, wait, my students can just drag and drop this assignment in here and it just gives them the perfect answer. I need to think in my assignments, like rethink all of that.
So that clip that just played, that's from Richard Socher, who's the CEO of U.com, which actually combines a lot of the AIs and, has a lot of other capabilities to do research and all these types of things. He's a former professor at Stanford and one of the original investors in Hugging Face, and he's a big investor in AI now. And he's not as well known as like Sam Altman. Sam Altman's a little more of a businessman, and this guy is too, a business person. He used to teach AI at Stanford, and he went to, he went to Stanford, but he teaches AI there. But anyhow, what I want to really say is this clip really highlights an important point, that you can take your assignment and basically drop it in u.com and it'll just do the assignment. And that hasn't really clicked yet with a lot of people in education, because they're used to saying, okay, well, the assignment's sitting on the desk. The kid goes in and like types in a prompt, right? And tries to get the essay and to generate it, and either turns it in or tweets it or whatever. And what this does is this uses an agent-based system. So the agent can see the instructions. To do this assignment, you need to do like the 4 following things, and you need to write a rough draft and verify your sources and all those kind of things. And the agent can just read all the instructions, complete the assignment, even over multiple iterations, which is what you're starting to see with AIs anyhow, happening like at the end of test time compute. And he really explained that when you're looking for what they call grounding sometimes, or verification of the sources, that's a big advantage of u.com. It'll check the source to make sure that it's not hallucinating. And you can even click right away and it'll show you where in the article it got the specific quote. So it's not just giving you a general article that makes a point. It's like, well, this is like where we're validating. We're validating it, and it can just complete the assignment. All the student literally has to do is drag and drop. They don't even need to do the upload. Like for a while you had to, that little paper clip you saw in the prompt, you'd have to upload what you wanted, have it summarize it or analyze it. No, you just drag it in and your homework's done. Then second part, just quickly what he said, this is something that we talk about a lot. He's like, well, I think this is good because now professors are going to have to think about, gee, I need to change my assignments. And I think what's hard is a lot of them are still, how can I still give the current assignment and have the AI not do it? And we're way beyond that. We're like in another dimension. I mean, this is like thinking about how to grow crowd outside. If we're talking about how we're going to keep our current assignments and have the kids not use AI, this is just like another era. We are in a new era. A lot of what people are talking about, even still on LinkedIn, I just think it's like in another century.
And I feel like if there was one theme for this episode, it is going to be reality check. And so every single day, just like the advances that you shared, which most of which people can barely keep up with. And one of the things we discussed, especially really over the last 2 weeks with the introduction of like ChatGPT 4.5 and 5 coming soon, Claude 3 Sonnet, and a lot of these newer models, is the integration of more emotional intelligence, right? Like machines are learning to understand and respond to human emotions. And it just looks different, right? Empathy, reasoning, all of these different things now are shared kind of qualities. And this brings us to, like you said, the challenge that's really before us today. And there was this amazing report put out by Brookings and Transcend called the disengagement gap that basically shared that most students are not deeply engaged in school. And the older they get, the worse it becomes. Surprise, surprise. It was led by author Rebecca Winthrop, who, interesting enough, I'm going to be on a panel with in 2 weeks. And she's the co-author of a book called The Disengaged Teen, and she's a senior fellow at Brookings as well. But basically, this whole report just like breaks down what's happening and also what needs to change. So one of the things they say in there is schools are tracking attendance and test scores, but they're not tracking the quality of learning experiences. And the basic result is this growing disconnect between students and their own education. So while AI is becoming sort of like better and better and better, and we're seeing people get excited and the field advance, we're seeing a bit of the opposite sort of on the human side. So it's not even just about AI, like so much of this work, not even about education, but it's about people's ability really to just live a life of purpose, of meaning, future of work, innovation. And just like you were saying the other day on the phone, there's going to be like chaos that breaks out. But one of the things the report also shares, we'll get to that in a moment because I want to we'll come back to that. But one of the things that the report also shared, which of course, as always, we will link for you in the comments, it basically just said like students are basically just going through the motions. And ever since I started working with student teachers, I feel like I see this all the time. And so much of my work is, yeah, that might be what people have done before you, but this is not going to be your future at all. And one of the things that I really, really, really appreciated about the report was they had these 4 different modes. It's kind of like this little chart. One was resistor, passenger, achiever, and explorer. And they were kind of like these descriptors of student learning and what it looks when a student is in each one. And so obviously, it was said the issue is only 7% of students are in explorer mode, which is actually where the learning happens. Explorer mode is basically you're not just following the rules, but they're engaged, they're thinking critically, making connections, but above all, they have agency. The majority of students, though, they said they found were stuck in passenger mode. They show up, they do what's asked, but they don't really care about what they're doing. They just want to get it done. No curiosity and no ownership. And I think when we see the advances in AI, like the interview quote that you just pulled out today, there is this quote going around that a couple of people shared, actually, a couple of people we follow and we talk about. And it said, capitalism rewards agency more than it does intelligence. And I feel like agency is often thrown around. And one of the ways we've defined it here on the podcast before is human agency is knowing how the systems we engage with influence us and how to influence those systems in return. And one of the people who retweeted this, it might be how I saw it, Andrej Karpathy, said that agency is greater than intelligence. And a little bit, I mean, he had a really long tweet. He's had quite a few on this topic. But one of the things he said, I had this intuitively wrong for decades. I think due to a pervasive cultural veneration of intelligence, various entertainment media obsession with IQ, but agency is significantly more powerful and significantly more scarce. And then he asks these questions and he's like, are you hiring for agency? Are we educating for agency? Are you acting as if you had 10 times agency? And Daniel Priestley, I feel like it was all these people like I follow, so like they were all like, this was coming up over and over. Then Daniel Priestley, who we also talk about a lot in the podcast, said that that is why academics hate capitalism. And so the report just really makes it clear that none of what they say in the report is even remotely a surprise, but it's just that chronic absenteeism is not a problem in and of itself. Disengagement happens long before students stop showing up.
Yeah, a few months ago, I was more optimistic about the education system because that guy wrote a book about if everyone just put their cell phone in a pouch, then it's going to be great. And then it seemed to me like the company sold all these pouches, and here we are. We're no better off. So now I'm looking for some new ideas. And I think bringing agency to the students is important because the reality is if they're really intelligent, there's 2 problems, right? If they're really intelligent and they have no agency, then it's just wasted, right? It'd be like if you have a Ferrari and you don't want to drive, right? There's no point to it, right? And the second thing is obviously we've been talking about intelligence is basically everywhere now. It's free, like anybody. You could maybe not even have a lot of biological intelligence, and then you have this intelligence. So if you don't have a lot of biological intelligence, but you have an agency, you can get some biological intelligence for $20 a month, right? And then you can apply that, your agency to that intelligence, right? And you can make even more money than the guy who sold the pouches, right? It can really be transformative. And to me, it makes a lot of sense, right? And it definitely, in my experience, I work with some high school kids in debate, and most of them are like, they pretty much go to school and go through the motions. And I took some kids on a debate trip, and I had the chaperone teacher. She didn't really know anything about debate. She's learning a little bit, but she told me today, she's all the kids told me they learn more in debate than they learn in school. I was like, basically every kid will tell you that because kids are going through the motions, right? It is just kind of like you bought from one period to the next, and then they buy cell phone patches. And other things are just weird. Like in my hometown, I just looked at the hometown newspaper, and one of the neighboring school districts spent some crazy amount of money on $600,000 to put surveillance cameras in the school buses. And I'm just like, what the hell? Now it's a school, the 80s, 90s. Just think how long even, institutionalized schooling's been around with no surveillance cameras on the buses, right? And we're all here. Right? Why don't you take that $600,000 and teach the kids about AI or hire a couple teachers or literally do anything like build a new football field? Why do we need surveillance cameras on all the buses? What is the point? All the money people say there's no money in education. All the money is just how can we control the kids? Can we put more security at the door? Can we put surveillance cameras in the hallway? Can we get them an e-hall pass so we can track when they go to the bathroom? Can we watch them on the school bus? And then we're like, oh, kids don't like to be here. This working for Dodge. What, you show up at your desk, you're like, oh, okay, there's a camera pointed at you, and then they monitor, you're used to the computer, like, who the hell would want to be there? Kids don't want to come to school. There's absenteeism problems. Do you want to go there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what was really interesting about that report is directly connected to what you're saying is that parents had a huge disconnect or a misunderstanding about what they thought was happening in school versus what was. And they said that parents think school is better than it is. And I think one of the things that I think is going to become apparent or that something people should have on their radar is that this is the first time a new technology is being adopted by everybody across society, right? At the same time. And as parents, I think, start to experience it more at work, I think they're going to start questioning more and more about what their kids are doing. I mean, COVID really exposed a lot of this. And so basically, what they said was while only 26% of 10th graders say they love school, 65% of their parents thought they did like school. And they said that schools report grades and attendance, but they're not tracking engagement, which means parents are in the dark about how checked out their kids actually are. And I think when you talk about like these phones and these pouches and all these kinds of things, it's a very convenient place to drop some blame where nobody's going to talk back to you. And so that kind of played a role. It was also really interesting, like where you live. Again, all of these things are no surprise. The same story from 20 years ago, but it also said where you live plays a role. Suburban students report better school experiences than those in urban or rural areas because of whether it's stability, resources, or just like stronger teacher retention.
Not more like activities again.
Yeah, exactly. Like debate, all these different, yeah, absolutely. But they said no matter what, students are disengaged. This is something just across the board. And a really big part of that was because the system just kills
Well, it's like an
curiosity.
illusion of engagement. It's well, you can check in on your kid.
Yeah.
You can see if they're 3 minutes late to the second period. And you're like, oh, today they weren't. They're engaged, right? But they're not really.
Yeah. And I thought there was one line in there, and it was schools are rewarding kids who know how to play the game, not the ones who explore, take initiative, or develop real agency.
I was just to say, this one debater. He was really good at playing the game. He was a really smart guy. He works on brain-computer interfaces now. But he figured out that at the beginning of the semester, you just put all your best effort into writing a paper. And then your teacher thinks it's great. And when he had to write other papers, what he would do was he'd copy and paste sections of other papers that he wrote. And he just put them in the middle of the other paper that he then submitted. And he said he never got caught once. And he always got an A. You talk about going through the motions, right? We see this other comments on stuff. Well, it's okay. I use AI, but just for the busy work the teacher gives. And now we have teachers creating busy work with AI, right? And the students doing the busy work with AI. It's like a very strange ecosystem. And obviously there's resource diversity. There's all kind of different interests across the system. But I also think you're right. Like as parents see it more, I don't think they're seeing it as much yet. There's still a lot of parents who are like, okay, my kid, they need to go to college and get this degree and get this job. And it's all this process in their head, and that whole structure is collapsing. Somebody posted earlier on LinkedIn today that there was someone started, I think it was OpenAI. They just graduated from college and they had 9 years of experience with neural networks. That means they started learning about neural networks and they're in the 8th grade. This is like a whole different ballgame. And there was this article, it was in a conservative media, so it was criticizing affirmative action type thing, but there was the kid was Asian and I don't know. He had pretty good grades. He had the 4.6. Somebody pointed out he probably could have a 5.0 or whatever. You didn't get in anywhere except non-top schools. So he skipped. He's not in college now. He's working, I think it's Google, and he has a job that normally requires a PhD. So this kid, he learned all this on his own in high school when he was probably late for class. But I think the one thing that's going to be challenging is that there are a good number of people who have to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Still want agency. And schools have been able to push those kids. They just keep pushing them. So they at least learn some basic math and writing and can interact to a degree, and they can play on a sports team and get some leadership skills or collaboration skills. Then they can get some job where then they're also forced to do things all day, right? And that kind of like worked. But the problem is there's no end of that pipeline anymore. I just don't really see it looking out into the future. Would business need somebody who needs to be told what to do, whether they're doing a physical job in a warehouse or some kind of other paper pushing job like secretarial work? The AIs are going to do all that. They're already starting to do that. In a way, I almost worry about the people who don't have agency. But the problem is schools can magnify it by kids lose agency, right?
No, definitely. And that's how the report ends. It says we don't have an attendance problem. We have an engagement problem. Grades don't tell us if kids are actually learning. And if we're not teaching agency, we're setting students up to lose in a world that rewards it more than intelligence. So then the real question becomes, which is a big topic of our podcast and whatnot, but how do you redesign education to build curiosity, engagement, and of course, agency before AI begins to take the lead? And I think one of the most important things to know on this note is too many people think of AI as just a tool. It's why I don't really like the calculator analogy because a lot of people are like, oh, it's just like a calculator and it's just like this. And in the terms of evolution of technology, yeah, maybe this is another thing on the timeline. But my calculator doesn't get up and go do my math homework for me. That they say the
It's
AI
like
tools
persuade
do.
you to go
Yeah, agency agency is a very, very unique quality that we haven't really had in a technology. You can say, yes, we've had it in social media, we have it in algorithms and things like that. But this front facing, and I think this invasive in society is definitely something new. So, this idea that AI isn't just another tool, it is really a shift in how we work, think, and create. The conversation too often starts with, oh, what AI tool should I use? Give me a prompt library and things like that. And what we really are encouraging people now to do more and spend more time doing is start with reimagining your processes, going back to engagement. If you are just going to automate existing practices, then are you automating practices that are already leading you to bad outcomes? And that is exactly why we created the AI Bootcamp for Teams. It is a 6-month hybrid program designed to help school leaders and their teams move beyond just this surface level AI adoption and into real transformation that is going to give people the skills, the mindsets, and above all, the agency to really thrive in this really sort of era. Because learning how to prompt is just not enough. You do need a strategy. You need a way to build an AI team, delegate tasks, track outcomes. So AI isn't just something you're experimenting with or using on the side to help you write an email or a letter. It's really something that is making not just your organization more effective, but is giving the people in your organization more agency. And here's what makes this experience really different. You will never feel left behind. AI is moving fast, and this program will move with you. One of the things that we offer is lifetime access to all of our live sessions, ongoing updates, and a community of forward thinking leaders. You will be ahead of the curve, even when everything feels incredibly overwhelming. So if you're interested, we will drop a link to the AI Bootcamp for Teams in the show notes. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I feel like we've been talking about him a lot lately on the podcast, is Dario Amodei. He's the CEO of Anthropic, who have just been releasing a ton of updates. They actually created this whole library around agents and how to build workflows, and they are just one thing after another. This episode with him was incredible. He basically, okay, when we see these big shifts in history, they obviously don't just wait for everyone to catch up. And I feel AI is the most unforgiving of these shifts. They just happen and then people react to them. And if you're paying attention, you can probably feel this. It's super overwhelming. So AI is not this distant future, right? Like something that's going to come. And I think a lot of people talk about it in that sense, a future sense, even though it's here right now, totally rewriting all the rules. And one of the things that he talks about in the podcast, I know this is a hard fork one, is he basically says a lot of people just don't want to believe what's happening. And that's his take on it. People are in denial, they're skeptical, they just hope that it doesn't work because if it does, they know the types of changes that are going to come about, and people hate change. They resist it, they deny it, they downplay it. But he said that that's not going to stop reality from moving forward. And he said this one line that I thought just really encapsulated so much, especially what you were saying earlier, right? That reality check. He said his advice to leaders was, don't look like a fool in retrospect, because when we look back in a few years, people are going to seem like visionaries and others are going to look like they completely missed what was happening. And I think you talked about this early in the beginning. Education is having such a mediocre conversation about AI. Sometimes it's hard to even go online and read, is this real? It literally feels like a twilight zone sometimes going between these different spaces and different people and conversations. The rest of the world is telling you, and I feel like AI companies now, I feel like 4.5 is going to get really, really, really neglected just because it's not some massive breakthrough or some big new feature. And I think the biggest thing people are missing is they're trying to microdose. They are trying to give you things in a bite-sized way, trying to show you what's coming, trying to help you acclimate. And it's with each update, they're just ignoring it, ignoring it, ignoring it. And while the rest of the world is really trying to push all of these advances, I feel schools are still debating. Like Turnitin.com just released a new thing and everybody's posting about it. Oh, should we do AI? What should we do? Cheating, plagiarism, just blue bugs. And things like you said, just constantly, how can we just counter what it is that's coming instead of really reimagining and really rethinking what it is?
Yeah, I read that turning in thing. I was, who that cares if you make it relevant, right? I know people have to make money, but so do people who sell cigarettes. And we eventually said that you really shouldn't do this anymore. And maybe on turn it in, there could be on cigarettes is a huge tax. So if you want to smoke, then you pay all this money, right? Maybe on turn it in, there could be some ginormous tax. Okay. If you want to use this turn it in thing, then the money would then be contributed to instructional redesign, helping kids prepare for the future. It's like a sin tax, right?
What is it that people put when something's harmful? You know, when things are harmful, people put that sign like cigarettes, like, oh, may cause job loss.
If you use this and you take on this approach to education, we hope you realize this will not prepare you for the future. But if you so choose to use it, there's a 20% tax, and then the government always takes a little money off the top or whatever they want to use it for. But 20% of this goes to actually help kids prepare for the future. Because, I mean, just think even that first year, right? When people were schools are spending all this money on writing detectors. You could have used that. The one thing that is strange, schools are like, we don't have any money. You spend money on dumb shit. Stop spending money on writing detectors and all these surveillance things to keep track of where kids go into the bathroom, right? And I'm not saying that schools couldn't use some more money, but they do spend a lot of money on stuff that is completely irrelevant to kids' futures. It's more about the adults in the building. Okay, what technologies can we use to better control the kids? Okay, and the people who are successful in life, they're not very well controlled, right? My best friend, I was thinking about this earlier, when he was a kid, he really wanted to go to debate camp. And his mom wouldn't let him go to debate camp. So he saved up a bunch of money and he just signed all the forms and he sent in all the stuff for debate camp. And he bought his own plane ticket and he went to debate camp. And when he got to debate camp, he called his mom and he's like, hey, I'm at debate camp. I already paid for it. And this guy's really successful. And does that surprise you that he's really successful? No, he is agency. He's a completely different person. Obviously, there's a little bit of a line, right? Even though we don't monitor our kids, the school, they monitor them all day. They're worried, oh, well, what period are they in? What the parent calls and they're in room 206, so they're not 208, but then the parents just let them drive off and go do whatever they want, right? So there's just a little bit of attention, and the schools are responsible for the kids. You could have like Doge, but not like a bad Doge. We don't want to have, oh, just show up at the school and randomly cut crap. That's status quo Doge. But if you had the future Doge and you're, okay, I'm going to audit all the stuff in a school that actually prepares the kids for the future. And then you got rid of all, you're right. You could even say, 85%, in order to cut something, like 80% of the people have to agree that it says no bearing on the kid's future, right? And then we could cut all that. Then we would have more resources to invest in the future. And obviously, the first thing I would cut is cell phone pouches. But
yeah, no, and I think one of the things about this right now, which is why I think it's so important to take a step back and really talk about the systems we have, the processes we have, and before you start automating anything, first asking, am I automating the right things? Is this the right workflow? What is the role of the human? What is the role of the AI? What are we doing together? And what kind of process and whatnot are we trying to come up with? And we always share that the best part about this is we don't have to do this alone anymore. Prior to generative AI tools, a lot of this redesign work fell on just humans alone. And we haven't really gotten and as far and scaled as much as I think we might have liked. Is very telling that alone it is hard, but together with these tools, especially when you have agency. And I think this is the most beautiful part about agency, and something I really hope that stays with everybody who's listening today is agency in some ways it is liberating. It's so freeing. It's the determination, it's the initiative, it's the risk taking, it's all the things that like bring joy to us, that give us the stories, right? That become the stories of our lives. Those moments when we tried something, we did something, whether it went well or it didn't go well, at the end of the day, they all become part of our own unique stories. And it was really interesting this past week. I got to go back to my high school where I was first hired. And I always say humanities, English, history, high school are definitely the most intimidating and hardest audience these days. And I was in front of all of them and I was thinking, it was so emotional because I always say, if I hadn't had that layoff notice in 2008, I would probably have been sitting in that auditorium. When I started teaching,
you're doing
yeah,
it.
absolutely. I had no plans of leaving. I feel I'm always trying to angle my way back in somehow. And one of the things that I shared with them in the very beginning was, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this poem that has gone completely viral. And it's called I Met My Younger Self for Coffee. And it's an excerpt from a book that she has that's coming out. And she posted an excerpt online and it just went viral. And I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are all writing their own versions. And it's basically just that if I was meeting my younger self for coffee and I was sitting across from them listening to them, what would I say? What would I tell them? And it's just so fascinating to me at a time when people are they trying to use things like the turnitin.coms of the world and blue books. Here's this person who just posted something online and the whole world seems to have really resonated with it and is now willingly writing their own, which I think really tells us, yeah, I mean, it really tells us that writing isn't the problem. You are if people aren't wanting to write for you, because that lack of personalization, that lack of agency isn't there. And so I started the keynote by saying, instead of meeting my younger self for coffee, I'm here meeting her at Northwood during this keynote, right? It's just so interesting how it really just reminds you that those unique stories come from agency and they come from the risks we're willing to take, the things we're willing to try. Sam Altman had a really interesting thing the other day. He was doing an interview and he was saying, we've invested in so many companies and other founders. And he goes, time and time again, the one thing that makes or breaks somebody is their determination. He said a little bit of what you said, right? Intelligence now is available. You can have the intelligence. He said, you can have all the pieces. He's like, entrepreneurship is just something you just get hit so many times. If you don't know how to keep getting back up, get back up, and you don't have that determination, you just will have a very hard time really sustaining yourself. And so I think when all is said and done, this element of human agency and how we foster it in people is going to be the one thing that can really give you that human advantage.
Yeah, because I think otherwise the kids are just stochastic parrots. The sad thing is school's kind of like chatbot version 1, right? Like people talking about AGI or superhuman intelligence. It's already passed the school curriculum, right? It passed the academic conversion test. It can do all the academic work. It's in any way stochastic, meaning so stochastic, if you're not familiar, that's the idea that it just learns from the pattern of the data and then it spits it back out like a parrot, right? Now it's a lot different because they're reasoning, they're pushing them, they're co-scientists to come up with ideas. They can just take the whole assignment and the drag and drop and go do it, right? So that if you say, oh, well, drag and drop, that's still stochastic parrot, then okay, so is the kid. What's the difference, right? The AI could do everything anyone could do in school. That's still stochastic parrot, then so are we. But I don't know if I'll dwell on that so much. The one other thing I wanted to bring up is there is this information story that came out this week. The information is a source that's kind of the breaking news. It's pretty accurate about the AI industry. And I guess OpenAI, they want to charge you what they do now, $20 a month if you want to use the basic chatbot. That was what I was just talking about, right? But then for $200 a month, you get a conversational reasoner, right? It's not just giving you information. It's helping you think through at the end before it gives you an answer. It might think through like 30, 40, 100 different alternatives and then come up with one. And then for $2,000 a month, you can buy a knowledge worker, right? That's a pretty good deal. $2,000 over $20 an hour paying our knowledge workers only 24 grand. That's probably not even minimum wage. A software developer for $10,000 a month, right? Or a PhD researcher for $20,000 a month. And obviously, it's not like one person, right? Because obviously, that might be more than some PhD researcher's salary. That'd be $240,000 a year. But it's you get like massive numbers of researchers. And when I start thinking about it, and plus, it's not entirely as well. Now, like a skill, we talk about skills we want, people to have, and we still, communication, collaboration, all those kind of things, right? But it's also like, what kind of knowledge do you need to work with a chatbot at that different level? You can basically be in 3rd or 4th grade and work with hey, give me an answer, explain this, talk to me, right? But it's okay. Well, PhD researcher, and what got me thinking about this was you really need a PhD to interact with these things. At first, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Then I was like, well, I don't know, because in medicine, you have the doctors and you have the nurses. And obviously the nurses, they know less than the doctors, but they still know enough to understand what the doctor is saying, right? Whereas the doctor told me, oh, it's this disease, do this. I don't know what you're talking about, right? So what kind of level of knowledge do I need to do this job with a PhD, like researcher with that level? And I think that's something that it's going to start to benchmark people, right? Not like in a negative way, not like you have benchmark 3.7, but just what kind of content knowledge, what kind of skills, what do you need to work with a different chatbot at a different level? And I think that people are more economically valuable, at least in a traditional employment sense. And then also if they want to be entrepreneurs to create for their own companies, are going to be people who have the better knowledge and skills to work with the higher level chatbots. If you had 5 people with PhDs and MBAs and all that working for you, you want some basic understanding of it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Teasing that out, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, literally exactly why I believe so much in design thinking. Because when you look at the habits and mindsets that design thinking helps you with, this is really the foundation of why we created Spark. prompt the human before the machine. Because if you think about it, one of the most important things going forward, if you have these kind of knowledge at your fingertips, these PhD people, it's not so much about knowing what they know, it's what kind of problems are you trying to solve? And now it's like you were just able to hire all of these amazing experts to be able to come in and help you figure out what it is that you are doing. Because at the end of the day, that empathy lens, those insights, that the experiences you have from in-person kind of experiences or just a combination of experiences. There's so many times where I'll have an insight or an aha moment, not from a event or a conversation, but from the culmination of them. I always say, this is why I love this podcast that we get to do every single week. I always say, even if nobody else listens to it, the little insights and aha moments that come from coming together week after week after week to synthesize, to contextualize, to really think about, if you think about it, this podcast is us constantly trying to answer one question. And that is, how do we give people more agency? How do we reimagine our education systems? How do we reimagine what work is going to look like in the future? And now we can bring in these like PhD level experts to sit here on the podcast with us and brainstorm through it. So I feel that drive, that agency, right, goes back to that again. What are you trying to do in the world? What is your role in the world? What kind of determination do you have for what you want to solve, what you want to do, what you want to create? This is truly what is going to make you irreplaceable. And the best part is it can all be learned. This is not something that you have to be born with. Everybody can learn this. And so if today's conversation got you thinking about the future, AI Bootcamp for Teams is here to help you take those next steps forward. It is not just about learning how to prompt. It's about building an AI team, delegating work, measuring impact, and above all, like we said, you get lifetime access to all of our ongoing updates, both updates that we share just like via text, but also the ones that we do in our live sessions, just so that you are always feeling up to date, because AI is definitely not slowing down and neither should you. And next week on the podcast, we're going to talk about desert sands, because we talk a lot about our programs and whatnot, but I am so excited. I actually want to say they are going to be the first district we worked with that, or I think first district in general, or school in general. I honestly want to say worldwide, they will go down. And unless somebody else has something they want to bring, but creating
we have it somewhere in the world we don't know.
Absolutely. Because they are going to be the first group who created a decision-making framework to amplify human agency. So we'll come back next week and talk about that and much more. But for now, have a great week, everyone. As always, if you have any questions, let us know, and we will see you in our next episode.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community. Leaving a review for the podcast helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities others may not even know exist.